if I told you that there's a story in the Bible so powerful, so human, and so profound that it could very well be the script for one of the most impactful films of all time, would you believe me? Well, that is exactly what happens in Book of Job. But be careful, what I'm going to tell you here is not the summarized version that you heard in Sunday school or that passage memorized or recited in public. Today, you will learn about the journey of an upright, just and God-fearing man who faced the kind of suffering that would make any of us question life, the purpose of pain, and even faith itself. How many times have you found yourself thinking, why is this happening to me? What did I do to deserve it? If this has ever crossed your mind, know that you are not alone. Job went through this too. But the big difference is that even in the face of tragic but good, the material losses, yes, death of Job's children, and even from sores on the body, he kept something that many people leave behind: unshakable faith. And look, keeping your head up in the face of chaos is harder than it seems. I guarantee that by knowing behind the scenes of the story in depth what happened in the heavenly realms, challenge between God and Satan, you amigos the good who seem more like accusers, and the incredible spiritual trial through which when you will see humans suffering in a completely different way, you will realize that many times pain does not come to destroy us, but to test our fidelity to God and reveal strengths we didn't even know we had. If you are ready to see the Book of Job like you've never seen before and discover valuable lessons to apply in your daily life, whether in faith, business, relationships, or in the fight against your own limitations, then stay with me until the end. Because this journey will move you, provoke reflection, and rekindle that flame authorship of God, even when all seems lost. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications to watch more inspiring videos that will strengthen your spiritual journey and bring messages of overcoming from the Bible to your life. Job is one of the most iconic characters in the Bible, whose story invites us to reflect on faith in the midst of adversity. He is not just another name in the sacred text. Job is a personification of the upright, just and God-fearing man who lived in a time when the relationship with the divine was something very close and personal. To know Job is to understand what it means to remain firm when the world collapses around you. This is a lesson that transcends time and applies to all of us at any stage of life. Throughout the Book of Job, we follow his journey marked by profound trials that challenge his unshakable faith. But to understand his reaction to suffering, we must first see who he was before the storm. Job was a man known for his honesty, righteousness, and generosity. His name, which already carried strength and meaning, symbolized someone who walked in God's ways with complete sincerity, something that, let's face it, is rare to find today. It is striking to note how the biblical account highlights Job's character even before telling the tragedies he would face. He is not an unattainable saint, but an ordinary human being with a social and family life full of responsibilities. The Book of Job presents a man who, despite prosperity and blessings, never forgot to maintain his spiritual commitment. In fact, this characteristic is so essential that it will be tested in such a drastic way that it makes us question our own capacity for faith. Furthermore, Job was not only respected for his moral conduct, but also for his wisdom and impeccable reputation in the community. He had a large family, abundant possessions, and a prominent position among the men of his time. All of this without losing his simplicity and connection with God, which reinforces the idea that it is possible to be just and honest even in the midst of life's riches and challenges. In addition to his exemplary character, Job was blessed with a large family and an enviable reputation. The Book of Job tells us that it's 7 sons and 3 daughters, a large family, full of life and hope. This alone reveals how much Job valued family life and caring for future generations. It is interesting to think that, even with so many material blessings, he never let prosperity divert his attention from what really mattered: his relationship with God. His possessions were vast, large numbers of cattle, servants, and land. Everything indicated that Job was a wealthy man and respected in his community. But this wealth, which could easily have been a source of pride or arrogance, did not contaminate his soul. On the contrary, Job knew that possessions are transitory, and so he kept his heart steadfast in worshiping God, always remembering that everything came from him. Another point that deserves to be highlighted is Job's zeal for the spirituality of his family. He not only took care of their material needs, but he also worried about the spiritual well-being of his children. Therefore, He offered sacrifices to God on their behalf, an act that demonstrates his awareness of human frailty and the importance of intercession before the Creator. This attitude shows that, for Job, true wealth was far beyond what the eyes could see. Finally, it is important to remember that Job, despite all this favorable scenario, was not immune to the difficulties that life could present. His story, as we will see later, is a powerful testimony of how an upright and just man can be subjected to extreme trials not as punishment, but as a test of faith and perseverance. This combination of blessings and challenges makes Job's journey a true lesson on the nature of human suffering and faithfulness to God. Early in the book of Job, we are taken to an impressive scene in the heavenly realms, where the sons of God present themselves before the Almighty. This heavenly gathering is a scenario that, for many, seems like a movie script. God exalting Job and Satan making his appearance, ready to test the faithfulness of this upright man. It is as if heaven were discussing the value of true faith, the kind that does not bow down just for blessings or prosperity. God singles out Job as a rare example, praising him for his integrity and righteousness. It is a recognition that gives weight to the entire story, because we are not dealing with someone who pretended to be holy or who was perfect only in appearance. Job was genuine, a God-fearing man in essence. Then Satan, the accuser par excellence, comes in and questions the sincerity of this faith, saying something that many people have thought could be that Job is only faithful because he has everything good in life. This heavenly challenge is not merely a theological debate, it has practical consequences. Satan argues that if God allowed Job to lose his blessings and be subjected to suffering, he would surely abandon his faith and curse God. Here we see the root of Job's trials, a test of faith that goes far beyond the human realm, involving heaven and the very essence of the relationship between God and his servants. God, with wisdom and authority, gives Satan permission to take everything from Job except his life. This is a crucial point, because it shows that suffering does not happen without limit or control. Even when it seems like the world is falling apart, there's a divine purpose guiding everything. This permission is what sets in motion Job's terrible tragedies, which will test his perseverance in adversity and his faithfulness to God in stunning ways. And here is a valuable lesson for us. Trials often arise as part of a heavenly challenge, a greater purpose that we cannot always see right away. Like Job, we are called to understand that human suffering can be a test of unshakable faith and true worship of God, even when everything around us seems to be conspiring against us. And that, my friend, is just the beginning of the journey. When divine permission is granted, Satan wastes no time in attacking Job's life relentlessly. The narrative in the book of Job details the material losses he faces right at the beginning of this ordeal. His oxen and donkeys, along with the servants who tended them, are taken by the Sabaeans. Imagine the scene. Job, who had a solid fortune, suddenly sees his material security collapse. This is a heavy blow for anyone, especially for a man of such integrity. But the misfortunes do not stop there. Soon after, fire from heaven consumes the sheep and the shepherds, increasing the burden of suffering. For Job, this rapid succession of tragedies must have seemed like an endless nightmare. Have you ever thought about losing everything, just like that, in the blink of an eye? The emotional impact is enormous, and this puts the unshakable faith he had cultivated to the test. But the story does not stop, as the intensity of the trials only increases. Soon after, the Chaldeans attack and steal the camels, killing even more servants. Job's material security is increasingly devastated, and he begins to understand that he is living in something far beyond the ordinary. It is easy to imagine how he felt, watching his world fall apart without any chance to defend himself. This righteous man who had taken such care of everything now faced losses that went far beyond his wealth. And the cruelest blow was yet to come. A strong wind knocks down the house where his children were, killing them all at once. The death of Job's children is a height of tragedy, a pain that surpasses any material suffering. It is as if the sky has fallen on him, testing not only his fidelity, but his ability to persevere in the face of the deepest pain a human being can experience. Imagine the scene. Job, faced with so much tragedy, tears his cloak, a symbolic gesture of deep grief and mourning in that culture. It is not just a physical act, but an expression of what is going on inside him, a mixture of shock, sadness, and, surprisingly, respect for God. Then he shaves his head, a classic sign of mourning, and prostrates himself in worship, even in the midst of the storm. This contrast is striking. The suffering does not completely defeat him. He chooses worship as his response. And then comes the phrase that is echoed for millennia: the Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. What a lesson, right? Job does not deny his suffering or pretend that everything is fine, but recognizes divine sovereignty in everything. It is a powerful demonstration of unshakable faith, because he recognizes that control is not in his hands, but in God's. For those who are going through difficulties, this example serves as a beacon, showing that it is possible to maintain hope even in pain. This moment also teaches us about faithfulness to God, even without understanding the reasons for suffering. Job does not curse, does not question God directly, does not make a fuss. He does lament, but with respect and reverence. This attitude is essential for those who seek to grow spiritually and find purpose in the midst of trials. Have you ever thought that faith is sometimes strongest precisely when all seems lost? Furthermore, Job is not alone on this journey, but his initial reaction to his losses sets the tone for what is to come. He faces a challenge with courage, and even extreme pain does not make him give up on God. It is a reminder to us, even when everything falls apart around us, we can choose to keep worship alive in our hearts. The story of overcoming in the Bible begins right here, with his reaction that inspires so many. After all the tragedy in Job's life, the scene returns to heaven, where a new heavenly challenge takes place. Once again, the children of God present themselves before the Lord, and Satan appears in their midst. The atmosphere is tense, almost as if we are witnessing some kind of heavenly court. God firmly reaffirms Job's faithfulness and integrity, which shows that despite the material and emotional losses, Job continues to be a God-fearing man. But Satan, as usual, does not take this lying down. He suggests that Job's faithfulness is a facade, and that if God allows, he will make Job blaspheme against him. The suggestion is clear: if the trials affect Job's body, the righteous man will not be able to bear it and will abandon his faith. It is an even more cruel test, which goes beyond material losses and targets physical and spiritual suffering. God, in his sovereign permission, accepts the challenge, but sets a limit. Satan can touch Job's body, but he cannot take his life. This shows an important aspect of the test of faith. There is a limit, a protection that God places even in the greatest difficulties. It is a lesson for all of us, reminding us that God does not abandon us, even when he allows us to face very difficult storms. This new challenge is a crucial moment in understanding the purpose of suffering in Job's story. It is not just a punishment or chastisement, but a profound spiritual test. Job will face physical pain, wounds, and helplessness, and his response to this will be a mirror for many who face similar trials. Knowing that even the righteous face hardships is a form of biblical comfort for those going through difficult times. Now imagine Job, an upright and just man, facing unimaginable physical pain. After losing everything, it is his own boldest turn to be attacked. Satan, with God's permission, afflicts Job with terrible sores that go from head to toe. Visualizing the scene helps us understand the depth of the ordeal. It is not just material loss, but intense human suffering that shakes the body and soul. Job sits amidst the ashes, a place of humiliation and penance. And to relieve his wounds, he uses a piece of broken pottery to scratch himself an image that, to us today, seems almost unbelievable, but which reveals the despair and loneliness of a man who has lost everything, including physical comfort. It is the ultimate test of human suffering, where unshakable faith is tested in the midst of pain. Despite everything, Job does not give in absolute despair. Even with his wounds open, he still maintains a dialogue with God, questions and laments, but does not abandon worship. This resistance in the face of the temptation to give up is an example for all of us, showing that spiritual trials can be faced with courage, even when the body cries out for relief. This scenario invites us to reflect on our own difficulties. How often do we feel pain that goes beyond the physical traumas, emotional losses, difficulties that seem insurmountable? Job shows us that perseverance in adversity is possible, even when the situation seems unbearable. It is an invitation to strengthen our faith, even in the darkest hours. Finally, it is worth remembering that Job's pain was not in vain. It is part of the process of spiritual growth and maturation of faith. This story of overcoming the Bible is an invitation to understand that, although human suffering is real and intense, hope and divine reward can come in due time for those who persevere. In the midst of so many trials, one of the most delicate moments in Job's story arises temptation from his own wife. Just imagine the person who should have been a support, a faithful companion, advises Job to curse God and give up on life. It is as if the very environment that should have strengthened his faith was trying to destroy it. The situation is a clear example of how suffering can influence even those closest to him. Job's response, however, is surprising and full of unwavering faith. He asks, "Shall we receive good at the hand of God and not evil?" This phrase carries profound wisdom. Job recognizes that life is full of ups and downs, and that worship of God must remain steadfast no matter the circumstances. It is a powerful reminder that faithfulness to God does not depend on easy times, but on persevering through adversity. Here we can learn something practical for our daily lives. How many times have we been tempted to give up when faced with difficulties, especially when even our friends and family don't seem to understand our struggle? Job teaches us that maintaining faith, even in the midst of provocations and temptations, is one of the greatest acts of worship we can offer to God. Finally, the scene between Job and his wife adds even more depth to the spiritual test he faces. It is a battle on several levels: material, physical, emotional, and spiritual. And so, we continue to see that the story of Job is much more than a tale of suffering. It is a true message of faith and overcoming for all of us. When Job's trials reach their peak, a new chapter begins with the arrival of his three friends Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. They come with the intention of comforting Job, something that, at first glance, seems like a noble and supportive gesture. But life, as we know, is not always simple, and what should be comfort ends up generating an even greater conflict. Upon arrival, Job's friends are shocked to see him unrecognizably a man scarred by grief, covered in wounds and barely recognizable. In a symbolic gesture of respect and grief, they tear their clothes and remain silent for 7 days and nights without saying a word. This heavy silence shows that sometimes, in the midst of pain, there are no words that can truly comfort. But as with many people, good intentions can end up being misunderstood. Job's friends gradually begin to argue and question the integrity of his suffering. This is something that is common even today when someone is suffering. Many end up judging rather than simply offering support. Job's story warns us about the power and danger of words in times of pain. There is a valuable lesson here. Silence can be an important ally when someone is facing trials. Sometimes we don't need to have a ready answer or a magic solution, but rather be present, offering companionship and empathy. Job's friends, despite their good intentions, will learn this the hard way. The arrival of the three friends marks the beginning of a series of profound dialogues that will further expose Job's spiritual and emotional ordeal. It is a moment when the test of faith intensifies and words become weapons and defenses, preparing the ground for speeches that change the entire story. Faced with so much loss, pain, and challenge, Job expresses his suffering in an intense and truthful way. He curses the day of his birth, not God, but the very day he came into the world. This lament is a cry that many of us can relate to when we are going through moments of deep suffering. It is not about rebelling against God, but an honest expression of human pain. This quote from Job reminds us that feeling fragile or desperate in the face of adversity is natural and is part of the healing and overcoming process. Contrary to what many people think, unshakable faith does not mean the absence of doubts or difficult moments, but rather the courage to continue even when hope seems distant. In Job's lament, we also see the extent of his spiritual trial. He does not run away from his suffering or pretend that everything is fine. On the contrary, he speaks about his anguish with complete sincerity. This attitude can be an example for all who face trials. Acknowledging pain is the first step towards true perseverance in adversity. It is important to remember that Job's lament is not a passive cry for help. He is, in fact, dialoguing with his faith, seeking meaning for so much suffering. This active search for understanding is essential for those who wish to strengthen their relationship with God and overcome challenges with hope in the midst of pain. Finally, this moment in the book of Job teaches us that the message of faith is not in denying pain, but in facing it with courage and fidelity to God. Job shows that even in the darkness of suffering, the light of hope can persist, and this light is what we will explore in the following speeches and reactions. Eliphaz, the first of Job's friends to speak up, delivers a speech that, although it seems comforting, carries a strong accusation. He suggests that Job's suffering is a consequence of some hidden sin, a common view at the time that associates pain with divine punishment. According to Eliphaz, only those who sin suffer so much, and this is what makes the scenario even more challenging for Job. This type of accusation, even when dressed up in kind words, often increases the pain of the sufferer because it imposes judgment without evidence. It is as if Eliphaz were saying, "You deserve this because you fail God." Today, we can see how this attitude can be harmful, especially when we're trying to comfort someone empathy needs to come before judgment. Eliphaz advises Job to seek God, repent, and confess any faults he may be hiding. It is advice that, at first glance, may seem wise, as it reminds us of the importance of repentance and returning to God. However, the tone of certainty and accusation makes the speech uncomfortable, leaving Job even more distressed. Therefore, Eliphaz's speech opens a way for a powerful response from Job, which we will explore next. This exchange reveals how the test of faith goes beyond physical suffering, also involving internal, emotional, and spiritual struggle. Feeling even more distressed by his friend's words, Job does not remain silent. His response is a mixture of pain, indignation, and a sincere search for justice. He complains that the words of Eliphaz and his other friends hurt more than they comfort, as if they were throwing salt into an already open wound. This reaction reminds us that sometimes, in trying to help, we end up hurting those who are already suffering. Job questions the lack of evidence of the accusations made against him, showing that unshakable faith does not mean accepting any judgment without reflection. He does not deny his faith in God, but calls for an understanding that goes beyond empty and condemnatory speeches. This stance can teach a lot about the importance of maintaining dignity, even in the face of attacks. In Job's response, we also see perseverance in adversity. Despite suffering, he maintains hope that his integrity will be recognized, even when all seems lost. This resilient confidence is a clear example of how spiritual trials can strengthen character, transforming pain into learning. Finally, Job's response sets the stage for following discourses, marked by profound discussions about justice, suffering, and human nature. It is an invitation to reflect on how we deal with our own trials and those of others. Before we delve deeper into the story, it is important to understand the heavenly setting where it all begins. There, the sons of God present themselves before the Almighty in a sort of heavenly gathering scene that reveals how much the spiritual impacts earthly life. And, to our surprise, Satan also appears among them, not as a distant character, but as an active one, challenging Job's faith. God, full of confidence, praises Job, calling him a man of integrity, righteousness, and fear of God. This description is not just a title. It is recognition of Job's upright life, which serves as an example even for us today. Here, the book of Job invites us to look at faith as something that transcends material blessings and is tested in difficult times. But what really drives this scene is Satan's challenge to the sincerity of Job's faith. He argues that Job is only faithful because he is blessed, that if things would change, Job would abandon God. This provocation brings up a universal theme. How far does our faith go when we face human suffering? With divine permission, Satan is given carte blanche to test Job, taking away everything is except his life. This is the famous heavenly challenge that begins Job's tragedies. This moment is essential for us to understand that suffering, although difficult, can have a greater purpose, a test that strengthens the soul. By reflecting on this scene, we can learn that our spiritual trials, however difficult they may seem, can be part of tests of faith authorized by God, and that true faithfulness is that which endures even when everything is against us. When we think of Job's trials, our hearts ache at the losses he suffered in Successione, a veritable storm of tragedies. First, he receives the news that his oxen, donkeys, and servants have been attacked by the Sabaeans, and everything has been taken away. You can already feel the impact, can't you? Losing material possessions like that, in the blink of an eye, is a hard blow. He barely recovers from the first blow when fire comes from heaven, devastating the sheep and the shepherds, causing more irreparable losses that leave Job devastated. Imagine the feeling of seeing, one after another, his possessions being ripped from his hands, as if the entire world were conspiring against him. But it doesn't stop there. The Chaldeans attack and steal his camels, killing more loyal servants in the process. The succession of material losses seems endless, and it's easy to think that Job might simply give up, lose hope, as if the pain of his possessions were not enough. An even greater tragedy occurs as strong wind knocks down the house where his children were, causing the death of all of them. This human loss is the cruelest blow of all, because family was the heart of Job's life and his main spiritual inheritance. This sequence of tragedies reminds us that trials can come in overwhelming waves, and that human suffering, even when it seems unjust, can be fertile ground for strengthening unshakable faith, as long as we persevere in adversity. Imagine being faced with one tragedy after another, and yet maintaining the serenity that Job demonstrated. When all these losses fell upon him, Job did not succumb to blind despair. He tore his cloak, a traditional gesture of mourning, and shaved his head, showing his deep grief. But he did not lose his bearing before God. What's most impressive is that even in the midst of the suffering, Job fell to his knees in worship. It's as if he were saying, "Lord, in spite of everything, I know that you are in control." This is true worship of God, an attitude of surrender and respect, even when things don't seem to make sense. And then comes a phrase that marked history, used to this day to teach us about faith in the midst of the storm the Lord gave, and the Lord is taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. What a powerful lesson. It is the expression of a righteous man who understands that everything belongs to God and that faithfulness does not depend on circumstances. Job teaches us that unshakable faith is not a naive belief, but firm trust that remains even in the face of total loss. It is an invitation to think, how do we react when everything is taken from us? Is it possible to find peace in the midst of chaos? This response from Job paves the way for the next chapter of the story, where the heavenly challenge gains strength again, this time attacking not only Job's possessions, but also his own body. After the material and family tragedies, Job's story returns to the heavenly realms, where the challenge between God and Satan begins again. The sons of God present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also appears among them, like a tax inspector trying to undermine Job's faith. God reaffirms Job's faithfulness, emphasizing that he remains an upright, just, and God-fearing man, even after losing everything. This statement shows that the true test of faith is not in blessings, but in perseverance in the face of adversity. In turn, Satan insists, suggesting that Job will resist as long as his physical health is intact, but that he would blaspheme God if he were struck in his body. He challenges the sincerity of Job's faith, insinuating that loyalty is self-serving. So God grants Satan permission to touch Job's body, but protects his life. It is a permission that brings a new dimension to human suffering. Now the spiritual trial takes on a physical and visible aspect, an even crueler test of Job's unshakable faith. This moment reminds us that the trials we face may not only be external, but also internal, affecting the body, mind, and spirit, and that faithfulness to God is challenged precisely in these most difficult times. Now imagine the physical suffering of Job, who was afflicted with terrible sores from the top of his head to the soles of his feet. The Bible describes a situation where he not only feels intense pain, but also experiences deep humiliation, sitting in ashes, which for the culture of the time was a sign of great affliction and repentance. To alleviate his suffering, Job uses a piece of pottery to scratch himself, a gesture that reveals his constant agony and lack of resources for dignified treatment. It is a powerful image of human suffering in its most raw and painful form, showing that the ordeal can reach levels that seem unbearable. Here, the story of Job teaches us something essential. Unshakable faith is maintained not only in the face of external losses, but also when our own body is affected. Often, physical difficulties are the ones that most test our perseverance and hope and pain. Despite the pain, Job does not abandon his faithfulness to God, which demonstrates a powerful message about the importance of resisting even when everything seems to be falling apart inside and out. This physical and spiritual resilience inspires those who face their own challenges. This bleak picture sets the stage for the next difficult moment, the temptation posed by someone very close to him, Job's wife, which represents a new test of his faith. At a time when suffering reached almost unbearable levels, Job's wife appeared as a tempting voice. She advises Job to curse God and die, a suggestion that reveals how despair can lead even those closest to us to lose hope and faith. But Job's response is a true example of unshakable faith and faithfulness to God. He responds with a phrase that echoes to this day, "Shall we receive good at the hand of God and not evil?" It is a clear teaching about accepting God's will, whether it be a blessing or a trial. This interaction between Job and his wife shows us the challenge that many face when suffering reaches its peak, remaining steadfast in the face of temptations that seek to undermine faith and hope. Furthermore, it is an invitation to reflect on the words we choose to say to those who are going through difficult times, whether we will be supportive or unintentionally, just one more reason for discouragement. Job's attitude towards his temptation reinforces his stance as a just, honest, and God-fearing man, who even when everything seems lost, does not abandon worship and trust in the purpose of suffering. After Job's ordeal, his three friends Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar arrive to comfort him. They are respected men, considered wise and godly, ready to help. But as we shall see, what seems like a supportive visit turns into a series of speeches that test Job's faith. Seeing Job in such a weakened and unrecognizable state, they tear their clothes in mourning and remain silent for 7 days and nights, respecting his pain and showing the depth of their friend's suffering. This initial silence conveys the gravity of the situation and genuine empathy. This attitude of respect and mourning prepares the ground for an intense dialogue full of teachings, as Job's friends represent different views on suffering, divine justice, and sin, which clash with Job's experience. It's interesting to note how true friendships face difficult times, but also how support can be flawed if there's a lack of real understanding of what the other person is going through. Something we've seen many times in real life, right? The arrival of these three friends marks the beginning of a debate that invites us to reflect on the causes of suffering and to seek biblical consolation that goes beyond appearances. Faced with such pain and incomprehension, Job allows himself to express his deepest regret, even cursing the day of his birth. This is not a blasphemy against God, but rather a human cry from someone who feels crushed by Job's tragedies and the trials that seem to have no end. This lament reveals the intensity of human suffering, something we can all understand, even without having experienced something so extreme. Job teaches us that it is possible to be honest with God and with ourselves, acknowledging pain without losing faith. He expresses a wish of never having been born, a thought that many have had in moments of anguish. And this humanizes his story, showing that even the most upright man goes through doubts and suffering. This moment of venting is essential for us to understand the complexity of suffering and the need for a space to express pain without fear of judgment, especially in faith. By following this lament, we are led to reflect on how we deal with our own pain and how we can find the strength to continue despite it. Eliphaz, the first friend to speak, delivers a speech that mixes consolation with accusation. He believes that Job's suffering can only be the result of some hidden sin, an idea that reflects a traditional view of the time he who sins suffers. For him, there is no suffering without guilt. He advises Job to seek God sincerely and repent, as if the solution all the ordeal lay in confession that Job had never made. Eliphaz tries, in his own way, to show a path to restoration, but his words end up being more burdensome than comforting. This type of discourse may be familiar to many who have gone through difficult times and received simplistic advice that does not consider the complexity of human suffering. The veiled accusation ends up hurting rather than helping. Eliphaz represents a challenge we often face when trying to understand another person's pain and temptation to judge and diagnose without truly listening. This stance is an invitation to reflect on how we offer support. This speech marks the beginning of the verbal confrontation between Job and his friends, revealing that, even in faith, there is great diversity of understanding about the purpose of suffering. Job questions the accusation of sin, asking for clear proof, because his unshakable faith does not accept being unfairly judged. He exposes the temptation of feeling abandoned, but maintains his posture as an upright and just man before God, making it clear that his trial is not the result of hidden guilt. This response is a precious example for all of us who, in difficult times, are faced with judgments or advice that do not edify. Job teaches us that it is possible to speak the truth of the soul, to express pain, but without losing hope and fidelity. His speech shows us that faithfulness to God includes questioning and seeking understanding, not a passive acceptance of suffering, but an active perseverance in faith and the search for meaning. Job's response, therefore, is an invitation for each person in their trials to find the courage to be authentic, even in the face of difficulties and accusations from others. By learning about Job's story, we are invited to reflect on our own faith and resilience in the face of life's trials. Have you ever wondered how you react when you face losses and suffering that seem insurmountable? What lessons can you learn from the example of Job, the man of integrity who never abandoned his unshakable faith, even in the face of the greatest tragedies? If this content touched your heart and made you rethink your journey, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications to watch more inspiring videos that will strengthen your spiritual journey and bring messages of overcoming from the Bible to your life. Join this community that seeks to understand the purpose of suffering and celebrate the divine reward that comes to those who persevere. Let's join us on this journey of faith and transformation.